So yeah, Kira, thank you for taking the time out to chat. First things first, do you think that you could maybe tell me a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm a voice actress based in LA. I've been doing this professionally since 2011 and as a hobby since 2004. So I've been voice acting for almost 20 years, which is wild to think. I mostly do video games, animation, and occasional other stuff here and there.
Yeah, so I was doing a lot of researching for this, and I thought I'd just get it out of the way immediately. Number one, big fan of Persona, so the fact that you voiced Ichinose in Strikers is awesome. And another thing that I didn't realize is how you kind of have a grassroots start in voice acting from things like Flash animation and Newgrounds.com.
Yeah.
I grew up with Metal Gear Awesome, so that's
Oh, nice.
so that's a pretty big deal. Do you feel like that helped you find your feet when you were first starting out with professional voice acting?
Absolutely. Because these days I see a lot of people just want to jump into the industry immediately, and that can be hard, especially because when you're first starting out, it's like there's a lot of things that you need to do, like getting acting training is a thing that, we always suggest because that's the most helpful thing to voice acting is acting. So it's kind of like any kind of like taking acting classes and things like that. And you can learn things, you can even take coaching, all that sort of stuff, but it's hard if you can't actually put what you're learning into practice. And it's going to be difficult to get any sort of high profile paid work when you're starting out because you're still learning the ropes, you're still learning how to work with clients, work on deadlines, turn in auditions, all that kind of stuff. So I think like the online hobby spaces and like indie work, student projects, all that kind of stuff can be extremely helpful for people getting their start. And most of the time that stuff like isn't paid. I didn't get paid when I first started doing like hobby work, obviously, but it's a really good way to just like collaborate with content creators and just kind of get the idea of like how to work with people, how to turn in your audio, improve your audio, all that kind of stuff. Like there's so many great things that you can learn from doing that.
Well, you've clearly come quite a long way from those days. You've got a very extensive portfolio of voice acting work. So how does it feel to be a professional voice actor?
Well, it's something that kind of happened over a period of time. Like I don't think there's one specific, because somebody can book a paid role, but I think just because you get your first paid role doesn't mean you necessarily feel like you've made it or gone pro or whatever, because it's all about that consistency of work. So somebody could get paid for a voice role like once every 2 years, and I think they would still maybe find it hard to consider themselves a professional voice actor at that point. So it's kind of subjective, but I think it's like once you start getting things with some amount of regularity, that's when it starts to feel like, okay, I'm sort of doing this. But it's like even when I was doing that, I had other jobs for so many years because I live in the Los Angeles area and it is so expensive and difficult to live here. So I had to have other jobs for like my first 7 years of being in LA. And so I think people don't always realize that it's very much not overnight. And even the actors who you think have overnight success or who are doing so well, it's like they've very likely been working at this for a long time. Some of the people I know who everyone thinks like, oh, this person just came up out of nowhere. It's like, no, they were doing like the hobby communities online for years and all this kind of stuff.
Well, you've clearly worked very hard to be where you are currently. What would how do you feel? Like, what do you think the most important thing that's helped drive you to find some success?
I think just wanting to do it, just wanting to work on these projects, enjoying what I do. It's like everybody has goals that they want to achieve in their career, and that's going to be different for everyone. So I think if you have specific goals that you want to work towards, that can be really helpful. Because, I mean, if people say, like, well, I want to be successful, that's kind of a vague goal. And it's like, again, success is subjective. What does that mean? But it's kind of like, oh, I want to work on more video games, or I want to do this specific type of project or play this specific type of role that maybe I haven't gotten to play a lot. I think like actionable goals are really important and that can help drive you to keep improving because, sometimes things get slow for everybody and that can be discouraging. So you kind of need like those goals in the back of your mind to keep you auditioning, keep you like I guess like actively looking for work.
That's fantastic advice. Do you feel that you still are setting actionable goals, and are those actionable goals adapted or changed as you found more success?
Oh, all the time. Because a lot of times I achieve specific goals that I really want to do. And I say, it's hard because it's so easy to then look at the next goal and say, well, I want to do this. And then, it's like you'll never be happy if you're not careful. So I do try to take a lot of time to be grateful for the things that I have accomplished. And some of my goals have been working on specific franchises. And so when I got to do that, because like you mentioned Persona earlier, so I did want to be in a Persona game at some point. So it was really, really cool to get to work on that franchise in some aspect. And another big one was Genshin Impact. I was like, I just want to be in this game somewhere. And then I finally got to be a playable character earlier this year. So that was like really special to me. And then of course, like I got to work on my absolute favorite media franchise of all time, which is JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, playing the character that I wanted to play for 8 years. So I'm kind of like, well, I can never ask for anything else again, right? But it's like I still have some sort of long-term goals in my career. Like I'd love to be in like a AAA Western video game where like the voices are done in English first and I get to be the original voice of the character. Like I think that would be really cool because usually like I've worked on so many cool games, but I'm always like the English voice, right? Like, and I'm really grateful for that, but it would just be so cool, I think, to be the original voice of a character in like a huge, huge project. I've gotten to do it for indie games and a few other things, but getting to be in a game like I don't know, like Last of Us or something someday. I think that would be really cool. And I'd also love to voice act for toys someday. I don't even know how to get into that because that's like a totally different side of the industry from what I do. So, it's like I have goals and stuff, but I also try to be like, hey, I've done a lot of really cool things. I'm going to be grateful for that.
Yeah, you touched on some really interesting points in that actually. That I was meaning to ask you later on in the interview, but so dubbing a character from say Japanese to English, how do you feel that you managed to sneak in elements of your version of the character to take some kind of ownership of that?
Well, I think that it's always going to have a little bit of us infused into the character just because we're a different person, right? So any actor that plays a character is going to have something that makes it unique to them. It's the same thing even if you're voice matching another actor, because sometimes that's the thing, like you're voice matching another actor who played a character in English before, but maybe they can't return to the role for whatever reason. And no matter how much you try to sound like them, of course, it's going to like have a little something unique because every actor is different. But I think a lot of times my goal is I want to honor the creator's original vision. So most of the time I am trying to sound like the original actor. Um, if that's what the director and the clients want. Sometimes they might want to take it in a little different direction, in which case it's like, yeah, let me know what you want. And, because of course it's like we want to give the clients whatever they want first and foremost. But I would say, absent of like that specific note to do something different with it, I do try to, I guess, like stay true to the original to an extent, because I feel like, well, that's like what the creator's original vision would be for the character to kind of sound and act like this. So it is by default going to have kind of my own interpretation to an extent, but I like to at least honor the original, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. One of my favorite English dubs of all time is Cowboy Bebop's, but I feel that
Mm.
part of the charm and the allure of the English dub is that there is this almost feel that it's almost a reimagining of the characters in a certain way, if that makes sense.
I agree. I mean, that's considered like one of the most iconic examples of a really good English dub of all time. I guess like that's kind of a goal in a way too. I'd love to work on a project that is seen as like an example of a really good dub.
With when it comes to dubbing, do you find the process of, for example, like matching your voiceover to the lip flaps to be at all restrictive? Because there's obviously going to be some navigation of linguistic differences from the languages.
Absolutely. And it's something that gets better over time. Like you kind of learn how to work with that restriction and still make the acting sound natural. But I think one of the difficult things is that when we are, like in general, when we're acting, when we're interpreting a script, pacing is one of those things that can kind of inform the read. So when that's taken away, when you have to go at the specific pace and you have to pause when the mouth pauses and all this kind of stuff, it's like that takes away one aspect of how you can kind of like sell your performance. And generally it's pretty good because script adapters work super hard. Their job is to take the raw translation and then rewrite it into something that stays true to the original meaning as much as possible, but fits the mouth. And ideally, if you have a really good script adapter, they can make it so that it's not so hard to fit it. But sometimes it's just, there's nothing they can do. They're like, well, the client wants this specific wording, and so we're gonna have to go fast, or we're gonna have to stretch it out or whatever, because we can't change this specific phrase or whatever. So I think one of the most difficult little things with like making dubbing sound natural is it's just one of the differences in language between Japanese and English, where there's like pauses in the middle of a sentence because it sounds natural with the way that the Japanese language works, which I also study and speak a bit of Japanese. But with the English language, it's like we don't pause in the middle of the sentence unless we're like trying to think of what we're going to say next or something. So, a lot of times there's this pause where it just is not natural to pause, but you have to do that because that's what the animation does. And so, learning to like make that sound natural can be an uphill battle.
Yeah, absolutely. As you just mentioned, actually, you've studied and learned a little bit of Japanese. Do you feel like that helps you at all with these dubbing projects from, for example, with anime or games?
Yeah, I think it really helps if it's not like a huge advantage, obviously, but I think if I'm hearing the original, it just helps me understand the intent even more. Um, I don't know, like I just kind of notice that difference between like when if I'm recording something with that was in Japanese and I'm previewing the original and I'm understanding a good amount of it, to me it just seems a little bit easier to match that than, I also do a lot of like game dubbing from Chinese and Korean, for example, and I know very little of those languages, so it feels more like flying blind if that makes sense. Um Oh yeah, I was gonna say the other thing too, as to your previous question, because it just reminded me. I think another challenging thing with dubbing is that you can give this great performance. You can be like, oh, I was like fully committed to that. I did something really cool. And then they check it for sync, play it back, and they're like, that was great. We need it a little faster. Great, but it was too fast. Stretch it out a little. So you need to be able to replicate that performance. Like, it is very, very technical. So I think sometimes people, especially if they have like maybe like a film or theater background or something, which is not where I come from. I've always done voice, but for people who do come from those backgrounds where they get to like study their lines and really get into character ahead of time and stuff, and then they do dubbing where it's all cold reading and it's all like, okay, that was great, but we need it different for sync. You really have to be able to kind of replicate your performance on a technical level.
That sounds very intricate. I can't imagine getting through it, being very proud of a read, and then having to redo it for something like the timings.
Oh
Um,
yeah, and that's all the time. So, you get better at like eyeballing it and stuff. Um, Oddly enough, working from home doing dubbing for like a couple years, that helped me with sync. Because I was just like doing it for so many hours, I guess. I don't know, but It's like, it's funny because people online, like on Twitter and stuff, they're like, oh, dubbing takes no skill, anyone can do it. Dubbing actors have no talent, all that kind of stuff. And it's like, you have to do so, like, just because you think maybe the reads aren't like 100% as natural as you would like because we're literally restricted by what's in the video. It's like, that doesn't mean it doesn't take skill. Like, I would love to watch these people in a dubbing session who say that it takes no skill and watch them do it.
It must have been a lot of work to adapt to that kind of new way of doing things, working from home. Did you have a home studio or anything?
Yeah, I felt really fortunate that I bought a booth in 2018. I had obviously no way of knowing that the pandemic was going to happen, but because I do a lot of independent work for clients as well, I needed some way to record from home in good quality. So I wanted to get a booth because it's like I just didn't have, some people had like walk-in closets and stuff. A lot of people do that, but like I was renting at the time. I didn't really have any way to like create a small space to record in. So I would like buy all these things in hopes of like, oh, maybe this will help my sound. It's like, no, I just had to get a booth. So I finally got a booth. And then when the pandemic hit, everyone was scrambling to get booths because most people would just like go into their agencies to audition or like go to the studio, or they'd have like kind of a crappy setup at home that they would send their audition on because they know that you would go into the studio anyway if you booked the job. So I did have to upgrade my setup a lot because obviously I never thought that I was going to be doing dubbing from home. Like that was just something like, even if we had to pick up one line, we would go into the studio for it. So it was kind of like I had to get a monitor for my booth, for example, because trying to do it off like a small laptop, it's too hard to see like the video and script at the same time. And also like then the fan can go on if you have a laptop because usually when we dub, we are using Source Connect Now, which is on Chrome. And Chrome is like a huge RAM hog. So my computer would overheat and stuff. There was like a lot of learning curve early in the pandemic because even if for those of us who had done home recording for like independent clients and things like that, it's just very different when you're working with like a real time session with a studio doing like dubbing to picture and all this kind of stuff.
Do you find yourself actually in studios again now?
Mm-hmm. It's a mix of both. I would say right now it's about kind of half and half on average because some studios are like, no, we're still cool with the remote workflow, helps keep everybody safe. And also then they can use a mix of talent. Because, for example, the main dubbing markets are, at least in the US, are Los Angeles and then Dallas, Texas. And so with the pandemic, there is a lot of crossover. So instead of like shows that were all Texas cast or all LA cast, no, it's like a mix of both with certain shows, which is really cool. And sometimes they even add like New York people and, sometimes even people who don't live in any of those places. So I think that's really cool. Like, I'd love to see that flexibility, but I also get why it's more difficult for studios because on the mix end, as it's been explained by a lot of my engineer friends, when you have like everybody on a different space and a different setup, it's just like, it's way more time and money in post production to try to make everybody sound like they're in the same scene talking to each other.
Yeah, absolutely. You're clearly very passionate about the voiceover industry, and I like you were saying earlier with the kind of subs and dubs discussion. You're clearly very involved in the anime kind of scene and things like that. I also read on your Wikipedia page that you helped found the first Alaskan anime convention. Is that right?
Yeah, back when I was in high school and had never been to a convention before. So um, I researched on the internet, what do people do at anime conventions? That sounds fun. Why don't we have one here? Okay, I'll start one, which is, you don't realize what a big undertaking that is when you're 17. So, but I was the president of my high school anime club, which, yeah, I was a nerd. So still am. Who am I fooling? But yeah, so I just decided we're going to make a convention. Oh, people have costume contests. Okay, let's have a costume contest, like all that kind of stuff. And at the time, I knew I wanted to be a voice actor because the year before that was when I kind of like really discovered anime, I guess, through people at school, and then decided, oh, I want to do that. People do the voices for this stuff and voices for video games. Like I want to do that. So, which is actually funny because the game that got me into fighting games, which is my favorite genre, like the first game that people had me play, the first fighting game was Soul Calibur 2. And I was like, I want to be a voice actor in a game like this someday when I was like 16 or 17 or something. And then now I'm two characters in the latest Soul Calibur. So it's pretty wild. But yeah.
And if you can't go to the convention, you might as well just bring it to you.
Right? Yeah, because I mean, we were so remote up there at the time. And what's really cool is that that convention is still going. I mean, obviously, new ownership took it over and all that kind of stuff because I moved out of state, but they are on hiatus right now because of the pandemic. But I hope to see it return eventually because it was super cool that something that I kind of just like started the I guess like planted the seed for was able to grow into like this huge thing and be in convention centers and all that kind of stuff.
No, that is amazing. Clearly, community is really important. How important to you, are like the fans, people that have kind of taken up the position that you might have been in once when they watch something that you're, I don't know, dubbing, for instance?
Oh, super important. That's why I actually founded a community for voice actors. So it actually kind of grew into like 20,000 members. I mean, not all of them are active, but I first kind of started the early iterations of the community that I founded back in like 2006. And it started from like the Flash animation community, because back then I was like, hey, there aren't really any resources for like Flash animators and content creators to find like hobbyist voice actors. Because back then, like when I was first doing this stuff, Flash animators, because it was all just like stuff done for fun. This was before like content was really, they found like good ways to like monetize online content. This was before like YouTube and all that. So everyone who worked on this stuff was just like doing it for fun. So usually when people needed voice actors, either like the person making it would just do it themselves, or they'd like use text to speech voices, or they'd get like their random friends and family members to do it. There wasn't like a whole lot of, hey, let's go find voice actors for our project. So a lot of how I got work back then was just by like emailing these people and be like, hey, if you need a voice actor for your animations, I can do it. And they'd be like, oh, cool. Here's something coming up that needs a girl voice or whatever. Like it was a very different culture to how it is now. But I was like, hey, what if we had like a message board? Because that was the thing back then, is everyone was like, oh, let's have like forums, and actors can find like content creators and people can just help each other out mutually. And then, over the years, we kind of didn't have the need for that anymore because there were other communities and resources that came up. But then, like a few years ago, we're like, hey, what if we kind of revived this as a Discord community? Because that's the way that like young people like to communicate now and stuff. So it was a learning curve for me because I'm like, I don't know how to use Discord. But then we ended up building it into like this big server, and I wrote resources. I write all these articles to kind of like just help people who are in that position where I was, of like, hey, I want to do this. How do I start doing it as a hobby? And then how do I eventually transition that into a career? And so just like I'm really passionate about like providing resources to people, because I don't think that basic information needs to be paywalled. I get that, like, yeah, of course you pay for classes where you're working with a teacher to help you with acting and to teach you like stuff about like acting techniques and, critique your reads and stuff. I get that that's totally something that needs to be paywalled. But when it comes to just like basic information, like I think that should be free and open to share. So, I'm just kind of like, yeah, here, I'm gonna volunteer my time, write a bunch of articles, make a free Discord community where people can ask questions, chat with each other, share the stuff they're proud of. Content creators can come in and be like, hey, does anyone want to help out with my student project or indie game jam or whatever? And it's just like, I don't know, it's really cool to see so many people come together and all these new voice actors that are coming up as a result of having online spaces where they can learn about stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Part of the reason that at Voquent we don't have any paywall for people wanting to join up onto the kind of database, is it does help with that fostering newer talent without having to immediately slam on a, a charge. Do you feel that there are new avenues as the internet advances, constantly? Do you feel like there are new avenues that people are using to get into voice acting? I always see things like community mods for games or something that will occasionally have actual voices like attached to them.
Absolutely. So, one thing that's really exploded in general is the indie game scene. And I've just seen, I mean, obviously, like indie games were a thing even back when I was doing Flash stuff, but now I'm seeing indie games that have full-on console releases. So, to me, that's super cool that somebody can live anywhere in the world because most of these indie games record remotely. They're not going to have the budget to rent out a studio and all that kind of stuff. So it was really a great avenue to get into video game work that was accessible for people who maybe didn't live in LA or, somewhere where there's a lot of that kind of work that they can go to the studio and do. So, I think that's just like super. And a lot of times because these projects often don't have like the budget that maybe a major game developer or publisher would, it's like a good avenue for up and coming actors to get their start. And my community actually helped come up with a resource called the Indie Rate Guide, where it was like a way to be like, hey, I know that a lot of times these smaller publishers and content creators, they can't always afford maybe like the equivalent of like union rates. But here's like something that the community has come together that they feel like is fair, some ranges for like this smaller stuff that like genuinely doesn't have the budget. So, I think like stuff like that is really important, like transparency and like, hey, what's fair pay? What's fair terms that we can ask for? There's a lot of kind of stuff that's always in discussion in the community, like hey, contracts, like what's something that's okay to see in a contract and what should be a red flag, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that touches on another really kind of big part. What kind of businessy stuff do you think that people should, what up and coming voice actors might want to brush up on?
I think a really huge thing that I wish I had done this earlier, like this was like a huge mistake. I feel like that so I tell people like don't make the mistake I did. You need to start tracking all your jobs and your income because there's a lot of stuff that maybe they're not going to send you a tax form, and so like that falls on you to make sure that you're tax compliant and like reporting the stuff that you need to report. Um, and also it helps you keep track of like if you're owed a payment because once I started like tracking every job and like tracking the payment status and stuff like that, there's a lot of times where you have to remind people to pay you for a job. And it's not that it's like malicious, like of all the times, it's maybe once or twice in my entire career that somebody was like intentionally not paying. It's usually just that like they have different departments handling this stuff, things get lost, all this kind of stuff. They're like, oh, I thought we sent it out, or maybe they did send it out and it got lost in the mail, or it's like you never know. So it's just like really important that you're able to see, oh, this has been a few months and hasn't been paid yet. Let me follow up on the status, or, and just all this kind of stuff. It helps you with budgeting. It helps you, it's just like track your jobs. You can also see like, hey, here's how much I made from game work this year versus narration or dubbing or, whatever. Like there's just so many reasons why I think it's like really important to be on top of your finances and keep track of each job that you're doing, what you're owed, all that kind of stuff.
So there's a large diversity of different types of voice work besides just games and films and stuff. How important do you think that things like narration are to someone who wants to become like a voice actor?
Well, I think that it's good when you're starting out to be open to all types of work. I mean, obviously, if there's something that you're just like, I have no interest in doing this specific thing, then you don't need to do that. But I think a lot of people jump into like, I see this more and more with up and coming talent. They jump into the industry and say, I just want to do anime. And I think that's not really a good mindset to have. Like, it's totally fine to have the goal and to kind of make that your focus. Like, hey, this is like the market that I really want to focus on working in, but I'm also open to other stuff because anime is kind of like it pays the least of every kind of work in the industry when you start talking about like typical standard rates for things and stuff like that. So it's kind of like you have to be passionate about it and or working a ton of hours, like a ton of hours if you want to make it your main thing. So it's totally fine to have that as a goal, but I think the more avenues of work that you're looking to explore, then the better it is because then you can have more types of work opportunities coming in. I mean, it's funny because everyone wants to do character work, which I love doing character work. Like that's the market that I fell into. But I would love to do more narration for like, I don't know, just like certain types of projects. Maybe not like long form narration. Like I don't have the patience to do audiobooks, I'll admit that. But I don't know. I'd love to do like train announcements or something like that. I don't know how people get into doing things like that, but I've met people who do that and they're like, "Oh, but you do anime. I want to do anime." And so it's like, can we just like trade jobs for a day and get to try different things? I think that would be fun. But yeah, I think it's like it's really good to be open to different types of work because if nothing else, even if you're not getting those opportunities, it'll make you a well-rounded actor. I rarely get to read for or work on commercials, but I've taken classes on commercial voice acting, and I think there's ways that that helps make me a better actor too.
That's a fantastic answer. Um, so obviously, you kind of achieved your dream of playing Jolyne in
Yeah.
Jojo. What is that like? That must be outstanding. Very few people just achieve their dream.
Yeah. I mean, I was a little crazy. I don't recommend having one role that you're like so intent on playing because I feel like I got lucky and I also just like shaped my destiny for 8 years. Like I did everything in my power to like ensure that the stars would align that I could at least audition for this role when it came up. Um, but I think, that can be dangerous because I've had roles that I'm like, oh, I'd love to play. I mean, never to the extent of this, but like I've had roles where it's like, oh, I really want to play this character. Like, you watch something or you play something that maybe doesn't have English voice acting, or maybe like later they do like another reimagining of it and they have a new cast or something and you're like, "Oh, I'm so attached to this character. I'd love to play them." And then you don't book it or even worse, you don't even get to try out. And that's super common. So it's like I mean, I try not to get attached. It was too late for this one. I fell in love with Jojo and then I read the manga and it's like, "Oh, there's a female protagonist in this one." And it was too late. Like I was like, "I really want to play this character." But I think in general, it's like good to not put too much hope on something that's really specific like that because 99% of the time you probably won't even get to read for it. And that's like how it's happened with other characters that I really wanted to play. But I feel really fortunate that I got to play like my literal dream role of all time. Not many people can say that.
I'm so happy that the stars aligned for you in that. That's uniquely awesome. Okay, so do you prefer to play a hero character or a villain character?
Generally a villain, but I would say I just like to play any characters that are really well written and nuanced and interesting. I think the reason that a lot of people answer villain to a question like that is because sometimes the hero characters, it can be boring if you're always like the good guy. But when you get to play a villain, a lot of times you play like a really interesting character. But that being said, there can be villains that aren't written with depth either. Like if a villain's whole point for existing is just to be like, I'm bad, I'm evil, then it's kind of like, well, there's not a lot to work with there as an actor. But the most interesting villains are the ones who aren't just bad for the sake of being bad or being an antagonist to the main character. They're there because they believe in some way that what they're doing is right. And so, as an actor, if I'm playing a villain or just playing anyone that's kind of, has questionable motives, it's like, okay, but usually they believe in some way that they're justified, even if it's flawed reasoning. So I always try to look in and like, I feel like you can't approach it from the perspective of well, I'm playing somebody who's bad. It's like, no, you're playing this character who maybe does bad things, but they believe in some way that it's the right thing to do.
That's yeah, I completely. So it's about motivation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Kira, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for talking to me. Um, can is there any way that people can find you? So your socials maybe, or
Yeah,
is there
so
anything you're working on?
I mostly use Twitter, which is just under my name, and then I started streaming video games on Twitch recently. So that's been kind of like a big thing that I've been spending a lot of time doing. You can follow me on Twitch at Miss Ziggy Stardust, or it's linked from like my other socials.
That's amazing. I'm gonna drop that all into the description when this goes up. Again, thank you so much for sitting down and talking with me. Such an interesting story.
Oh, thank you so much.